Chapter 16. The Unraveling. Mark hesitated, his brow furrowing as he mulled over my proposal. The tension in the room was palpable, and for the briefest moment, I thought we had him. The other executives sat in uneasy silence, eyes darting between Mark, Adrian, and me. We were so close to tipping the balance in our favor. Then everything shifted. The atmosphere, once tense but manageable, began to crack, crumbling beneath our fingertips. It started with a low murmur, and then, at the door, a figure appeared, tall, commanding, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. He leaned casually against the doorway as though he owned the room. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "But can anyone join this little powwow?" The voice alone sent a jolt of electricity through the air, and every head turned toward the door. The room, already tense, froze completely. I heard the collective intake of breath as the weight of the moment settled in. It was Carter Hamilton. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The man who had just waltzed into the most critical meeting of our careers with an air of arrogance was none other than the person I had hoped wouldn't get involved in this war. But here he was, leaning against the doorframe like he had all the time in the world, and yet somehow had already seized control of the room. Mark, still seated, blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard. "Carter," he said slowly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I wasn't aware you had any business here today." Carter's lips curled into a smug smile. "Oh, I do now. Figured I'd drop in, see how things were progressing. I mean, after all, this merger has potential, but I think you're missing the full picture. And I happen to have an offer you might want to consider." His gaze swept across the room, finally resting on Adrian and me, sizing us up as if we were nothing more than chess pieces on a board. Adrian's posture stiffened beside me, the air between us taut with tension. "We've already presented our proposal, Carter," Adrian said, his voice low and controlled. "If you're here to cause problems—" "Oh, no! No problems!" Carter interjected, raising a hand as if to calm the room, though the gleam in his eyes suggested the exact opposite. "I'm just here to give everyone some perspective. You know, broaden the horizons a little." His tone was condescending, and it grated against my already frayed nerves. I exchanged a quick glance with Adrian, my pulse quickening. We had been blindsided. Carter wasn't just here to make idle conversation. He was here to upend everything. Mark, still caught between intrigue and caution, gestured to the room. "All right, Carter," he said, his voice measured. "If you've got something to say, go ahead." Carter pushed off the doorframe and walked toward the center of the room with the kind of confidence that came from years of dominating boardrooms and bulldozing over competition. He moved with precision, his eyes never leaving the executives, as if already planting seeds of doubt in their minds. "Thank you, Mark. Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice steady and assured. "I won't take up too much of your time. I understand you've been presented with a rather interesting merger proposal today." He shot a glance at Adrian and me, his smile sharp as though daring us to respond. We remained silent. "I'll admit," Carter continued, his tone shifting into something more persuasive, "what Adrian and Juliet here are offering isn't without merit. It's ambitious, sure, but—" He paused for effect, his gaze sweeping the room, ensuring every eye was locked on him. "Ambition doesn't always translate into the kind of stability you all need, especially when there are better, more secure options on the table." A ripple of unease passed through the room. The executives were watching him closely now, some nodding ever so slightly, their attention fully captured. He had them, and he knew it. Mark leaned forward, curious. "And I assume you're here to present one of those better options, Carter?" Carter chuckled, as if amused that it wasn't already obvious. "You assume correctly, Mark." Adrian stiffened beside me, his eyes narrowing as Carter continued. "Let's talk about stability, about the kind of deal that secures not just your company's future, but the future of your shareholders, your families, your legacy." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "What I'm offering is simple, a more controlled, predictable acquisition, one that doesn't rely on risky, hostile moves. One that keeps you all in positions of strength rather than pushing you into Adrian's, shall we say, aggressive, unpredictable path. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what he was doing. Carter wasn't just here to disrupt. He was offering a counter-proposal, one designed to make our deal look unstable, reckless. He was painting us as the risk, and himself as the safety net. Adrian stepped forward, his voice cold. This is nothing but a distraction, Carter. You're here because you want to tear down what we've built and replace it with more of the same old tactics. You don't want to innovate. You want to maintain the status quo. Carter shrugged, his gaze never wavering. Maybe I'm offering these fine people a way to protect themselves from unnecessary risk. That's something worth thinking about, don't you think? He turned back to the executives, his smile disarming. You've all worked too hard to watch it crumble under a hostile takeover, haven't you? I watched, feeling the pit in my stomach grow, as the expressions around the table shifted from intrigue to concern. He was turning them, little by little, with every calculated word. I could see it happening in real time, like sand slipping through my fingers. And let's not forget, Carter added, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, the history between Adrian's family and the Sterlings is a history built on deception, rivalry, and destruction. Is that what you want to invite into your business? He didn't need to say more. The seed had been planted, and the room was already shifting in his favor. Every hesitation, every skeptical look directed toward us. Carter had orchestrated it perfectly. Then, as if to deliver the final blow, Carter turned to the group of executives from Rockford Industries, the most influential players in the room. You don't need to decide now, he said smoothly, his eyes locking onto theirs. But I suggest you weigh your options very carefully. One by one, the executives from Rockford stood, their faces unreadable. The leader of their group, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, adjusted his suit jacket and looked around the room. We'll need time to consider all proposals, he said, his voice steady. The tension in the room skyrocketed. Adrian's fists clenched. They said nothing. I could feel the air growing heavier as Rockford's team gathered their belongings and made their way toward the door. The silence that followed their exit was suffocating. No one spoke. No one moved. We had lost them. And Carter knew it. With one last triumphant glance around the room, Carter gave a satisfied nod. Well, I suppose that's my cue. I'll leave you all to it. He turned on his heel, walking out of the room as casually as he'd entered, his presence lingering long after he'd gone. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt the full weight of what had just happened sink in. Carter hadn't just disrupted the meeting. He had planted doubt so deep that we might never claw our way back. And now, everything we had worked for was hanging by a thread. After the meeting wrapped up, I found myself walking out of the conference room alongside Adrian. The air outside felt electric, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the room. Well, Adrian said, glancing sideways at me, that could have gone worse. I shot him a skeptical look. You mean aside from Mark trying to undermine us at every turn and Carter just planting the seeds of doubt? Yeah, it was the best outcome I could have imagined. He's always been like that, Adrian replied, his expression hardening. He sees any challenge as a threat. But we held our ground. That's what matters. Maybe, I said, still feeling the unease settle in my stomach. But I can't shake the feeling that he's not done yet. He's got something up his sleeve. Let him plot. We've made our move, and now it's time for him to react, Adrian said, his confidence unwavering. This is how the game is played. Right, the game, I said, feeling the weight of his words. But what happens when the game changes? Adrian turned to face me, a flicker of concern crossing his features. What do you mean? I mean, we're playing with fire, I said, my voice low. What if Sterling retaliates? What if my father finds out what I'm doing? What if this all blows up in our faces? Adrian stepped closer, his presence commanding. Juliet, you can't let fear dictate your actions. If you want to win this, you have to embrace the chaos. Embrace the chaos, I echoed, incredulous. That's your plan? Just hope for the best? No, he replied, his tone firm. My plan is to outmaneuver them. to stay one step ahead. But I can't do this without you. Without me? I said, skepticism creeping into my voice. What if you're the one I can't trust? Then don't trust me, he said, his gaze unwavering. Trust the clan. Trust the information we have. But whatever you do, don't second guess yourself. I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. There was a flicker of determination in his eyes that made my heart race. I wanted to believe in this partnership, but I knew I had to tread carefully. Fine, I said finally. But I need to know everything. No more secrets, Adrian. He nodded, his expression serious. Agreed. I'll keep you in the loop. We're in this together. As we walked back toward the elevator, I felt a strange sense of resolve settling over me. I was stepping into dangerous territory, but for the first time, I felt like I was taking control of my destiny. I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the events of the day replaying in my mind over and over like an endless loop. What had I done? The implications of my choices were beginning to settle in, heavier with each passing minute. The tangled web I had spun, carefully constructed around lies and manipulation, was now tightening, and I was at the center of it all. Adrian thought he had me, thought he could control the game, control me, but he was wrong. The pieces I had set into motion were already moving in ways he couldn't anticipate. I had made sure of that. Beneath my outward support for him, I was weaving a far more intricate plan, a plan to take everything, to take him down. The phone on my nightstand rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I reached for it, my pulse quickening. I already knew who it was. Hello, I answered, my voice soft but steady. For a moment, there was silence on the other end, and then a voice, smooth and self-assured, came alive. That couldn't have gone any better. It was Carter. I sat up in bed, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips as I ran my fingers through my hair, pushing it back from my face. You're right, I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the exhilaration racing through me. It couldn't have. No one knew the truth. No one suspected that while Adrian and I played our game of corporate warfare, I was orchestrating a far more dangerous play behind the scenes. Adrian thought he was pulling the strings, that he had me on his side, but he didn't realize I was playing him just as much as he was playing everyone else. While I had been gathering information on Sterling and Rockford, positioning myself as Adrian's key strategist, I had also been gathering every bit of intel I could on him. On Adrian. And I wasn't just planning a merger, I was planning his downfall, the ultimate hostile takeover. My father's company wasn't going to fall into Adrian's hands. I wouldn't let him or anyone else control the legacy my father had built. To do that, I needed an ally, someone who wanted to take Adrian out of the game as badly as I did, and that someone was Carter. So, what's our next move? I asked, leaning back against the pillows, my heart still racing but my voice steady. Carter was silent for a moment, the weight of his next words hanging in the air. Then he spoke, his voice laced with satisfaction. We're having another meeting tomorrow. The board was impressed with what we'd brought to the table. When we merge our two companies and take the majority of Rockford's holdings, there will be no stopping us. My heart thudded in my chest, a rush of adrenaline coursing through me. Perfect. The plan was unfolding just as we'd envisioned. Adrian's empire would crumble, and I would be the one standing over the ashes. No one would see it coming. Excellent, I replied, a satisfied smile creeping onto my lips. But just as I was about to say more, a soft knock came at my door. I turned, frowning, as the door creaked open. My mother stood in the doorway, her face pale and grim. Her usual warmth and calmness were gone, replaced by an expression that sent a cold chill through me. Our eyes met, and I knew instantly something was terribly wrong. I'll call you tomorrow, I whispered into the phone, my voice low. Something has come up. Carter didn't argue, sensing the shift in my tone. I'll be waiting, he said, before the line went dead. I lowered the phone and set it aside, my attention fully on my mother. She stepped further into the room, closing the door behind her, but the look on her face didn't change. The air in the room felt heavier now, and the pit in my stomach deepened. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She stood there for a moment, as if gathering her strength before her lips finally parted, her voice trembling. Your father. I didn't need her to finish the sentence. The weight of those two words hit me like a freight train, the world around me suddenly tilting. What happened? I asked, my voice cracking, my heart pounding in my chest. He's taken a turn for the worse, she said, tears glistening in her eyes. The doctors. They don't think he'll make it through the night. The blood drained from my face, my entire body going numb as the reality of her words sank in. My father. The man I had been fighting for, the man whose legacy I had been trying to protect with every calculated move. He was slipping away. Without a word, I pushed the covers off and stood, my legs shaky beneath me. I walked over to her, taking her hands in mine, but all the confidence, all the control I had felt moments ago was gone, replaced by fear, by helplessness. We need to go to him, I whispered. She nodded, her own composure barely holding as she squeezed my hands tightly. We'll go. But Juliet. Her voice trailed off, her expression full of pain. You need to be ready. You need to decide what happens next. I nodded, but the weight of the decision hung over me like a guillotine. My father's company, the empire I had been trying to save, it was now up to me. The plan I had set into motion with Carter was working, but I hadn't anticipated this. I hadn't anticipated losing the very reason I was fighting so hard, and now, the next move was mine to make. With my mother at my side, I walked toward the door, my mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. The storm I had unleashed with Carter was far from over, but tonight, my world had shifted. I was no longer just playing the game. Now, I was facing the consequences, and there was no going back.